Okay. I'm just wondering, are we live online yet? We are, okay. Good afternoon, bienvenue, and welcome everybody here to the European Parliament in Brussels. We have some people in the room here with us, and we have many more of you online joining us for this very first ENAJ Symposium. The European Network of Agricultural Journalists is a little over 10 years old. It's an umbrella organisation for agricultural journalist guilds and associations in a number of countries across Europe. So we are a voluntary group of journalists, and I want to thank my colleagues for bringing all of this together here today. As I said, we are in the European Parliament. It is a very appropriate setting because it is here that many crucial debates and discussions and amendments and rows happen in order to shape policy and legislation which affects, obviously, consumers, but obviously as well food producers and farmers right across the EU. The title of today's conference is The Future of Food and Farming in the EU. Now, that's a very broad title, and we could have maybe a week-long conference to go through all facets of that. But under that heading, finding a balance to support farmers and meet consumer and retailer demand is what we're going to focus on today. How do we square that circle? We have a packed schedule over the next 2.5 hours. We'll hear from many key stakeholders, and as I said, well done to the organisers in assembling such an esteemed list of guests and experts, and thank you to them for making time to be with us here today. And some of the people you're going to hear from have travelled great journeys to be with us for this symposium today. At the end, Wolfgang Bircher from DG Agri will sum up proceedings, and we'll have 3 roundtable discussions in the meantime as well. But before we kick off here, we have a welcome message from the President of ENAJ, Lisa Balocchi.
Good afternoon, dear speakers, dear colleagues, dear guests. Unfortunately, today I can't be with you in the European Parliament for the first symposium that ENAJ organized. ENAJ, you know, is the organization of agricultural journalists in Europe, and it collects around 4,000 professional journalists, and the aim is to improve the freedom of press and to qualify agricultural journalists. European elections are coming fast, and the ENAJ is strongly committed in the European reality. We think that agriculture is one of the main topics of this election, and this symposium has been organized to better understand what the landscape is, and we want to see this from different points of view. I mean farmers, I mean policymakers, I mean consumers. So it's a big opportunity for all colleagues present in this room or connected online, and I hope you will appreciate our challenge for this. I leave the floor to the speakers.
Merci Lisa. Well, maintenant, pardon pour mon français, mais je souhaite profiter de cette occasion pour remercier Monsieur le député Christophe Clergeau qui nous accueille aujourd'hui. Merci également à ma collègue du conseil d'administration de ENAJ, Yann Belu, et membre de l'association française des journalistes agricoles et son équipe qui ont conçu ce programme ici dans le Parlement européen. Je donne maintenant la parole à Christophe Clergeau.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur O'Reilly, et bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis absolument ravi de vous accueillir ici au Parlement européen pour votre symposium. Et je vais être court en introduction puisque je vais rester avec vous, assister à vos travaux et j'essaierai aussi de rebondir, d'apporter mon commentaire à la fin de votre discussion. Moi, je me suis plongé dans le monde agricole il y a près de 27 ans, en devenant assez jeune le chef de cabinet de Louis Lepinsec au ministère de l'Agriculture en France. Et mon parcours m'a amené à être plus ou moins proche des questions agricoles, mais à finalement toujours y revenir, jusqu'à rentrer au Parlement européen il y a un an, à la suite d'Éric Andrieux, que beaucoup d'entre vous connaissaient, et qui m'a passé la main. Et donc je siège à la Commission Agriculture et à la Commission Environnement du Parlement. Et c'est en soi déjà tout un programme. Je suis d'ailleurs le seul socialiste à être dans les deux commissions. Un mot sur la journée d'aujourd'hui, puisque je vais annoncer la couleur. J'ai commencé ma journée à finir de récolter les 104 signatures pour objecter à la Early Non-Objection de la Commission Agri sur l'acte délégué, sur le BCAE 1, sur les prairies permanentes. Je l'ai poursuivi en séance plénière pour voter contre la procédure d'urgence sur la réforme de la PAC. J'ai ensuite participé à une émission de France 3, grande télé française, sur les questions agricoles. Ensuite, je suis passé, avant de vous rejoindre, à un colloque organisé par des mutuelles sur amiante, pesticides et mutuelles, drame d'hier et d'aujourd'hui. Pourquoi je dis ça? Pour dire simplement deux choses. C'est que aujourd'hui, en tant que député européen, je suis plongé heure par heure dans l'accélération de ces crises, de ces débats, de ces discussions sur les politiques alimentaires et agricoles. C'est vraiment quelque chose, depuis que je suis arrivé, qui me mobilise quasiment à 100%. Et je suis en même temps, d'une certaine manière, coincé dans des débats qui se sont beaucoup radicalisés, avec des jeux de pouvoir, des oppositions, des accélérations de tensions à l'approche des élections européennes. Et je voudrais terminer par là. Pour moi, le type de discussion que vous allez avoir aujourd'hui est extrêmement important, puisque notre urgence, ça va être, dès le lendemain de l'élection, de sortir de cette radicalisation du débat, de sortir de ces affrontements permanents et de chercher un chemin d'avenir pour l'agriculture et l'alimentation qui permettent de donner une durabilité réelle à cette activité économique centrale qu'est l'agriculture, en relevant pleinement les enjeux du Green Deal, de la transition écologique et de la transition climatique. Et pour en discuter souvent avec, par exemple, Pascal Canfin, nous partageons ce constat qu'on est arrivé aujourd'hui à une situation de blocage qui nécessite de nouvelles initiatives, qui nécessite de nouveaux apports intellectuels, qui nécessite des initiatives transpartisanes et qui nécessite de mettre sur la table non pas des idées de réforme technique de la politique agricole commune, mais une vraie réflexion ouverte sur sa refondation pour ouvrir tous les possibles sur son avenir. Donc merci encore pour votre initiative, merci pour votre rôle de tous les jours de journaliste pour éclairer les citoyens et contribuer à nourrir le débat public. Et je vais suivre avec attention vos discussions d'aujourd'hui, en espérant que ce sera aussi le début d'une relation plus forte pour les mois qui s'annoncent. Merci à vous.
Et merci beaucoup, Monsieur Clégeot. Oui. Okay, before we move to our first round table, for those of you that are watching us online, you will have an opportunity through the chat there to ask any questions that you may have, and we will do our best to get to them as the proceedings continue throughout the afternoon. But before our first of three round tables, we are delighted to welcome a special guest here today. Professor Alan Matthews is Professor Emeritus of European Agricultural Policy in the Department of Economics School of Social Sciences and Philosophy at Trinity College in Dublin in Ireland. So that makes two Irish people here today, which is great. His research interests include the Common Agricultural Policy, the relationships between trade and food security, and WTO trade norms and disciplines. He's also a contributor to capreform.eu. And we've asked Alan here today to begin the discussion. So, Alan, I'm going to hand the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Damien, and good afternoon to everybody and also to those of you online. It's a great privilege to have been invited by the network of agricultural journalists to open what is, I understand, your first symposium. So that's an extra bonus, if you like, to be the first to take the floor. And you've put the focus for the discussions this afternoon on the future. But I guess in looking to the future, it's important to also take stock of where we're starting from. And both for our economies and societies in general, but specifically for our food system, the last 3 years have been ones of extraordinary turbulence. So we had the COVID pandemic and the responses to that in 2020. Which led to quite significant changes in consumer behaviour, if you recall, at that time. We then had the rise of energy prices throughout 2021 as demand started to recover after the COVID lockdowns. We then had the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which of course exacerbated those input price increases, but also sent prices on world markets soaring. And of course, we've seen the fallout from that over the last number of months as well. So what I want to do with my first slide, if I may ask you to change, is just to remind you where we've come from. And this is rather a busy slide, but there's 3 messages that I want you to take away. The first is the dark blue line there, which is the retail price index for food. So what it shows is that over a period of just really 2 years, 24 months, food prices across the European Union increased by 30%. Really quite an extraordinary change given the relatively stable prices we had experienced beforehand. The second point to take is what has been happening at farm level. And here you need to look at the red line, which is the producer prices for farmers, and the orange line, which is the input prices for farmers. You'll notice that the orange line is rather stepped. That's because the other data are monthly and there are only quarterly data available for input prices. But you can see that input prices and indeed producer prices began to increase in the months in 2021. Sometimes food prices, at least producer prices, sorry, not food prices, producer prices moved a little bit ahead. Sometimes it was input prices. But what you need to bear in mind is that roughly they kept in lockstep up to the peak of around October 22. And what that means is that if you have an increase, let's say, of 10% in producer prices and you have a similar 10% increase in input prices, then you also have a 10% increase in farm incomes. So there's a sort of a comparison there. So what we observe in this period of rising prices, yes, input prices were rising, but so were producer prices and so were farm incomes. What we observe in the more recent period, of course, is that those prices are beginning to fall. And again, input prices are falling, but so are producer prices, roughly to the same extent. And the same lockstep situation occurs. So we've had a fall since the peak of around 11-12% in both price indices. But what I want to highlight is that the latest data we have here at the end of December of last year suggests, in fact, that we're still back where we were really before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So relative prices between inputs and outputs for farmers seem to me to be not really in a crisis situation, which is what the Commission has suggested that we're in at the moment. They're still quite buoyant relative to where we have seen them, for example, prior to 2020. The third point which I think we can learn from this graph is to look then at the relationship between, let's say, producer prices at farm level, that's the red line, the light blue line, which is the dark blue line is, I think I said it was the retail food prices, I beg your pardon, that's actually the processor prices, so the prices of output from the food processing industry. And the light blue line at the bottom is your retail food price index, which, as I say, increased by about 30%. But what I want you to observe is the lags that occur. so that producer prices went up, but it took some time before they were reflected in an increase in the processors' prices, and in turn it took another couple of months before they were reflected in the prices in supermarkets and at retail level. And that's partly because of contracts. So contracts are signed some months in advance. It's partly because, I guess, if you're a supermarket, you're looking to see whether your competitors are also beginning to raise prices. You're reluctant to do so until you see some movement in the market. But you can see that eventually there was this reaction at retail prices. And then if you look just at the last few months, we see this quite steep fall in producer prices reflected in a somewhat smaller fall in the processing prices, but food prices at retail level have been stable, in fact even slightly increased in 1 month in the last couple. But I put that down more to lags in the system rather than to any evidence that there's really been, if you like, excessive price taking in the system. That's obviously something which will be discussed during the sessions later. Next slide. So what I want to look at here is how farm incomes have changed over the past. And the dark line here is the benchmark. So this is essentially the change in real wages and salaries in the non-farm sector, and it's in real terms, so adjusted for inflation. And you can see there was sort of steady, slow growth over the period since 2005. But then since COVID, we've seen actually no improvement, if anything, a slight fall in real incomes because of the high rates of inflation. The dotted line then is the farm income indicator per family. So it's the family farm income per family work unit is the measure. And that has also increased. In fact, it has increased from about 40% of the non-farm wage and salary figure to about 60%. So there's been not only an improvement in absolute terms, but also in relative terms. Most of that, however, has come not because of an increase in the real value of what farmers have been producing. There has been some increase. Most of that improvement in the relative position of farmers has come about because we have fewer farmers. So about 80% of that improvement is due to the fall in the number of workers, and about 20% comes from the additional value added in real terms that farmers have added. I should just make a caveat on this slide because clearly there is quite a significant gap there between incomes in the non-farm and farm sectors. This is an EU-level slide, and there's always the caveats that you will have, of course, heterogeneity. You will have differences between member states across farming systems. But it's particularly true when measuring relative incomes, because we know that almost 45% of all holdings in the European Union are in just two countries, Poland and Romania, both of which, particularly Romania, would have relatively low incomes in any case. And we're comparing incomes, as I say, almost half of all holdings in these two countries with the average wages and salaries across the European Union as a whole. So if we were to do the similar graph for individual countries, for France, for Ireland, there would be a gap. The gap would be narrowing, but it would not be as big as what is shown for the EU as a whole here. Next slide, please. Now, we've seen that incomes have been improving, and in fact, if we looked at that dotted line, one point I didn't highlight is that actually the last 3 years have seen, that's 2021 to 2023, have seen the highest real income that we've seen throughout the period. But we still see farmers protesting. We still see farmers saying that prices are not sufficient to allow them to make an income. And I think to understand this sort of apparent inconsistency, we need to understand and to take account of, again, the heterogeneity, but this time within the farming community itself, between farmers. And essentially, you all know the well-known statistic about the distribution of direct payments, 20-80%. It's not quite as dramatic, but it's of the same order in terms of who actually produces our food that we buy. Essentially, around 20% of the holdings produce certainly 70%, maybe a little bit more, of the food that we eat. And on those farms, the larger farms, incomes are pretty decent. I wouldn't say we have an income problem for those farms that supply most of our food. But the majority of the farms are indeed struggling. They do not have the possibility, the scale, to enable them to generate an income which is comparable to what they observe in the non-farm sector. So what we see then is obviously protests looking at how can we address this issue for the majority of farmers. And what I see is in the discussions is a move back perhaps towards a more managed system of markets. And I just want to flag some warning signs, if you like, about that. I'm just going to use one proposal. It's come from France with President Macron suggesting an extension of the so-called Egalim law in France. In fact, there's been 3 of them to the European level. But the idea is somehow that prices would be linked to the cost of production on farms. And I want to make clear that I'm totally in favour of greater transparency in terms of having market observatories which give us information on how value added is distributed along the food supply chain. I'm totally in favour of proper contracts, removing unfair practices and so on. What I'm really trying to get at here is this suggestion that somehow prices should be linked back to what farmers' costs of production are. And in my view, this proposal has a number of weaknesses. And my first point would be that there isn't actually a single figure which represents the cost of production. So next slide, please. And I've used milk production because it's a fairly homogeneous commodity, and we have data from the Fadden survey on specialist milk farms. And if we look at how costs of production are distributed across farms of different economic size, so that's what's available in the public database. We have 6 farm size groups ranged from relatively small to bigger farms on the right. And I've used 21 data because we know milk prices shot up in 2022. As I say, it was a record year for farm incomes. So 21 is probably a better year to take. There's a lot of approximations behind this figure, but basically the 2 messages that come from me is that if you are producing milk on those larger farms, the 2 farm size groups to the left, to the right, you are basically covering a reasonable income. Now, I've done this graph on the basis of the average agricultural wage in dairying. You might feel farmers should get a little bit more for risk-taking and so on. So there's a lot of assumptions behind this. But essentially, the message is that on these larger farms, the price of milk that farmers get is more or less covering their cost of production. But simply, this is not the case for those farmers in the 4 size groups to the left, and that's where the majority of dairy farms actually are. So again, we see this heterogeneity of farmers. But my point is that if you say that you want to raise to set the milk price based on the cost of production, whose cost of production would you choose? Is it the farmers to the right? Is it the farmers in the middle, or is it indeed the farmers to the left of this graph? Next slide, please. Now, the issue is that, hopefully you can read that there, the issue is, of course, that, again, you'll all be familiar with the criticism of direct payments, that by and large, most of the payments go to larger farms because they have more land. But if you make that criticism of direct payments, I rarely hear it made of market interventions, because precisely the same impact, even more so, would occur if you were to raise artificially, in a sense, to link it to cost of production, to raise the price of milk, let us take that example, by 2 to 3 cents per litre. The guys who are producing 200,000 litres a year, they will be fine. They will take their extra 2,000 and be glad to pocket it. Whereas the smaller farmers that you're trying to help will actually get much less benefit from that system. There's other weaknesses, and I'll leave it there for you to look at. I don't know, maybe the network can put this on a website if you're interested. But clearly that if you do raise prices, by definition, this creates excess supply because you're likely to choke off some demand in the market. In the past, when we did have a managed cap, we were able to export our surpluses with the aid of export subsidies. We can no longer do that, and I think very rightly so. So if we do have surpluses, then we either have to destroy them through distillation or whatever. So I think it would really be it would really add to some of the problems we have in terms of food waste and so on. There is a belief that somehow in the supply chain, and we know there is market power in the supply chain, but that this means there's also a pot of gold, which in a sense farmers could get their hands on in order to increase their prices. And I just would argue that that is debatable, and we have more expert people later in the panels to discuss that particular issue. My final point is that if we actually look back at the period when we did set farm prices based on costs of production in the CAP, and I actually started working, I used to travel to Copa-Cogeca in the early 70s to take part in establishing what was called the objective method, for those of you who are old enough to remember that. But it was a cost of production plus system of setting the intervention prices at that time. So next slide, please. But here you have a graph showing structural change and I've used just Western European countries because obviously in terms of Central and Eastern Europe, if we want to go back to 1960, there were huge changes in the political system and so on, and therefore I think it's probably not appropriate to include them. And the 60 years since 1960 divide into two 30-year periods, and I've called the first 30 years the command cap and the second 30 years the more market-oriented cap. And you can see there's one or two countries at the top. For example, Greece seems to have some reason why its farm numbers haven't fallen quite as rapidly as other countries. You notice that Ireland is rather strange in that we seem to have stabilized farm numbers over the last 20 years or so. But in general, we can see farm numbers declining by between 40 to 50, even 55% in the first 30 years, and a similar fall in the second period. In other words, I'm sort of arguing, and this is purely by association, it's not a full analysis, of course, but I'm really arguing that the times when we did have those high farm prices and they gave us all those surpluses and the problems, the budget surpluses and so on, it didn't actually help to stem the outflow of labour, which really reflects differences in labour productivity between the two sectors. So last slide, please. So what can we do then in terms of particularly smaller farms? And I want to argue that markets, particularly this argument that if we could just get prices to cover the cost of production, are a poor instrument to steer structural change, and that it's actually better to use targeted budgetary measures combined with regulation to the extent that larger farms and particularly mega farms are considered to be more polluting. That's an important instrument that could be used. In my view, labour productivity in agriculture must grow at around the same rate, or indeed a little faster, because we still have that gap, to catch up with the non-farm sector. If intensification options are limited, expansion in commercial farm size will continue. I say accelerate, but will continue. Seems to me, therefore, it's important to define a sensible target. I don't think it's sensible to suggest that we can stop or reverse the trend towards farm consolidation. The figures I've shown you would seem to support that. But it certainly does make sense to try to steer structural change, and in particular, perhaps within a European context, to try to avoid the emergence of sort of mega farms. So how to improve the viability of smaller farms? Clearly through adding value to the extent that they can specialise in high-value outputs or sell to premium markets, community-supported agriculture and so on. They can try to minimise their inputs through more agroecological farming systems. They can try to share costs with neighbouring farmers. They can diversify their on-farm activities into care farming and so on. Or they can engage in off-farm employment, so what we call pluri-activity or part-time farming, which is an important reason, I think, why we've managed to maintain farm numbers in Ireland. So achieving desired structural outcomes, and this is my final point, is, in my view, should start from an understanding of what drives structural change rather than assuming it's possible to recreate the structures of the past. So, Damien, that's my contribution to hopefully start a good debate for the afternoon. Yeah.
Very detailed. Thank you, as always, Professor Alan Matthews, for, I suppose, sobering in some ways. I just maybe have one little quick question, and I just wonder, and I will have a lot of silly questions here today, believe me. We let the experts do the disseminate what works and what doesn't. But just in terms of, we're at a stage now where, looking ahead, we see that more and more demands are being placed on farmers in terms of the environment and biodiversity loss and addressing those issues. And I just wonder, when you look at the trying to be more efficient and viable and then trying to be sustainable on the other side, are they mutually exclusive? How do we, and to use that phrase again, square that circle into the future?
I think it very much depends on the practices you're looking at. I think there's quite a lot of evidence that farmers who adopt, some of the practices of, let's call it regenerative agriculture, to kind of keep it fairly broad, actually can be profitable. It can be more profitable and certainly can be more resilient to shocks. But it's clear that there are other demands, particularly, let's say, in the animal welfare area, where there are clearly additional costs involved. And that raises the question of how we would want to compensate farmers for those relative, for example, to imported products. But I just warn that it's not entirely a negative side. There's a lot of environmental practices that I think are very consistent with good, profitable farming. Okay.
So we're going to move on. Thank you again, Professor Matthews. And maybe, a little later on, if anybody has any other thoughts or questions for Alan, I'm sure he'd be happy to take them here in the room. We're going to move on now to our first round table. And farmers feel that they are taken for granted, those farmers that we speak to, and we've seen recent protests as well. They feel that we don't respect the role as food producers, that we don't respect the food that we eat, nor appreciate in the world we live in today the preciousness of the food provided to us. We demand the highest environmental and animal welfare standards, quality and quantity, safe and locally sourced, and of course affordable food. So we're asking the question in this round table, how do we find the balance between fair remuneration for farmers and affordable food and safe food for consumers? And that obviously includes farmers and their families as well. They're consumers too, of course. My panel, first I'm going to go to Maïwen Lepierre, who's Director General of Serafel, France de Bretagne, the leading business in fresh vegetables in Europe. 100% of France de Bretagne vegetables are produced in Brittany on the 2,300 family farms of producer organisations grouped together in the AOP Serafel. Now, Serafel is also a member of the European Association of Producer Organisations, which altogether has 5,000 family farms called Fresh Co-op. Fresh Cut, OK. You're very welcome, Maïwen.
Thank you.
Also with me here at the top table is Camille Perrin, who's the head of food policy at Buick, the European Consumer Organisation, where she leads the Consumer Umbrella Group's food team. She deals with a variety of issues pertaining to EU food policies, including European legislation on food safety, food systems, healthy and sustainable diets. You're very welcome, Camille. And finally, I have Alexis Waravka, is the Head of Digital and Competitiveness and European Public Affairs at Retail Europe, which is the voice of groups of independent retailers and local retailers in Europe, where he leads their engagement on competitiveness and supply chain issues, single market and digital policy. You're very welcome as well, and I hope those introductions do you all some justice, and correct me if I have made any mistakes. Camille, I'm going to maybe turn to you first. We just have, I suppose, an opportunity in the room to ask questions, so please do raise your hand, introduce yourself and try and keep your questions short, and let me know who you're delivering them to. And online as well, you can obviously submit questions which we will try to get to as well. But Camille, when it comes to buying food, what are the most interesting trends you are seeing from consumers? Are they demanding more accountability when it comes to the environment, animal welfare, pesticide-free, etc.? Or is that becoming more and more into the decision making?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon from my side. Thank you also for the invitation to this very interesting seminar. Maybe I will start by saying a few words about BEUC, because I'm not sure you are all familiar with my organization. So BEUC is the European Consumer Organization. We are a network of 45 national independent consumer organizations across Europe, and basically we bring the voices of our members to the institutions. So together with our members, we defend the interests of consumers in EU policy making, and that includes in relation to food. Now, back to your question, I think it's fair to say that consumers' expectations about food have evolved over time. So indeed, today, consumers expect their food to be safe. That's a prerequisite. But they also expect their food to be what the packaging says it is, and that's not always a given. And they also expect their food to be healthy, sustainable and ethical. And by ethical, I mean for people, but also for animals. We've heard about animal welfare before. We have done research, but there are also plenty of EU polls that show that consumers are willing to change the way they eat for health or environmental concerns. It's really a majority. 2 in 3 consumers are willing to change their food habits. Now, what is also true is that they face a certain number of barriers when trying to turn their intention into actions. There is always this gap between our intention and then our behavior in the supermarket. And that has a lot to do with what is called the food environment. The term is a bit jargony, but we are all confronted to this food environment as consumers. It's the marketing and advertising, the price promotion at the supermarket, and I guess my neighbor will talk about that maybe afterwards. We come to the supermarket with a shopping list, we want to buy healthy and sustainable food, higher animal welfare, organic, but then once in the shop, we might just encounter a big display of crisps at the entrance, and then you have promotions on soft drinks. So at the end of the day, you leave the supermarket with something else than you wanted to buy. And another issue is price signals. As I was referring to price, it was mentioned earlier that food prices have increased tremendously over the past years. We know the reason, I won't expand on those. And obviously, for some consumers, it's simply not affordable to buy sustainable products because the price signals are not the right one. Today, if you want to purchase healthy and sustainable food, often you need to pay more for that. So we need to work on this, and maybe I will stop there and we can expand afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah, well, just on that, I mean, while we are placing all these demands on food producers and retailers, at the same time, you know, we have price wars, we have below-cost selling, we have the growth in discounters. Are we still looking at the price first as the most important consideration?
Many consumers still do, and that's why price signals are really key, and that's part of this food environment I was mentioning earlier. But there are ways to address that. For instance, some governments are lowering VAT on healthy food. That includes fruit, vegetables, pulses, for instance. There are ways to try and steer consumers towards certain products. Same with the farm subsidies. We've mentioned them earlier, and it's obviously a big pot of money that could be used in a more efficient way to incentivize certain production that would also have an impact on prices for consumers. And then there are also other practices by supermarkets. There are some interesting examples. For instance, in the Netherlands, some retailers have started to match the prices of, for instance, whole grain and refined grain products, whereas often whole grain options, although they are healthier, are more expensive. So there are many different ways to incentivize consumers to purchase healthier food. There's also a role for labeling, information. My organization is a strong advocate of Nutri-Score, for instance. instance, to direct consumers toward healthier choices. Unfortunately, it's been stuck in the Commission for a while. There is a lot of opposition on this, even though it's proven, it's demonstrated that it would have an impact on consumer choices. So there are many different ways to steer consumer choices. There is a role for policies there, but also a role for the actors of the middle of the chain who can really influence consumer choices. Thank you.
Okay, and that just brings me on to you, Alexis. I suppose we hopefully are coming close to the end or within sight of, you know, a really terrible cost of living crisis across Europe. There's indications that inflation is slowing down, which is obviously good news, particularly when it comes to purchasing food. But have we got into the habit now of putting a maximum price on food when we're in the supermarket, in what is it, Dominic Shelter of System you talked about recently as deconsumption? I don't know whether it's a phenomenon you've come across or if you can explain it.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. And just to tell very quickly, Dominic Shelter is the president of System U, a cooperative in France of retailers, which actually is a member of our organization, Independent Retailer Europe. So you will not be surprised that I rather agree with what Dominic Shelter said. But it's true that if you look across countries, if you're looking across Europe, what supermarkets, talking from our perspective, cooperatives, groups of independent retailers, it's true that with high inflation, what we have noticed is that there was a sharp drop in the volumes that were sold in supermarkets. And that drop actually hit the hardest the more expensive food products. So big brands, expensive brands, sustainable products, more healthy products, all those which are a bit more high-end, immediately we saw a drop in consumption. And we saw that across the categories of income. That's very interesting too. And that sends a very interesting message, a difficult message for the whole supply chain and for policymakers also, is that consumers do not seem to be willing to pay much more higher prices for food. When they're faced with high inflation, they immediately make some arbitrage and they basically downtrade. So that raises a challenge for when you're talking about the question which is the subject of this roundtable, clearly, and for every single actor across the supply chain. And solutions are not simple. If I start with retailers, what retailers have been doing, and that was actually highlighted a bit by the Professor Mathieu at the beginning, they have tried a bit to shield somehow, in light of higher prices, they have tried to shield a bit consumers from inflation by absorbing part of the costs of the supply chain, by absorbing part of their own costs, and that has resulted in lower margins. So if you look at the net margins of the retail sector, they typically were in the range of 2-3% net margin for many, many years. And if you look at the figures for the last 2 years, they have dropped. If you look at France, it's about 1.6%. If it's Belgium, you're at 1.3%. If it's Italy, it's 1.4%, for instance. So you can see clearly that they're trying just to decrease a bit what they're earning, which is not high at the beginning, to try to shield consumers. So, echoing Professor Matthews, you don't have a big pot of gold at the retail on the retail side, actually, if you look at the prices there. Of course, supply chains are very complex. You have many different actors. You just do not have farmers on one side and retailers on the other side. You have an infinity of actors depending on the subsectors. And that would be quite interesting to see if there are other pots of maybe not gold but silver somewhere in the supply chain. So this is why when the Commission recently announced that there was a new observatory to be created at EU level, we think that's a very good initiative, very good opportunity to put everybody, every actor, not just farmers and retailers or processors, but really every actor in the supply chain around the table and to look what's happening inside the supply chain clearly. And maybe just one interesting aspect from a retailer perspective. If you look at the shelves of retail shops at the moment, for many, many years, a large part of what is sold in retail shop is not just fresh food. You also have a lot of pre-packed food that are sold by very large global brands active across Europe and across the world. And if you look at those big, large global companies, that's very interesting if you look at the margins, for instance, because many of them have very high margins, between 10 and 25%, compared to 1 to 2% in the retail sector. You see that maybe there's a pot of silver there. They have very high market power. Many of their product categories, you have basically 2 big brands that supply the 15 brands that you see on the shelves. So very high market power, very big margins, and they usually, many of them, implement some very unfair practices that aim to fragment the single market, for instance. Many of them use what is called in the jargon territorial supply constraints, which are basically meant to try to fragment the purchasing market for retailers to make sure that those products that are sold everywhere in the world, you can only buy them from one actor with one price which is different across different countries. So that's maybe one aspect to look at. And just to finish very quickly, that raises still the question about how you can raise productivity at other stages of the supply chain. Because if consumers react very negatively to very high prices, we need to find a solution altogether at the different actors of the supply chain, how we can boost productivity to try to absorb this cost that we need to try to shield consumers from inflation and to try to shield them from new costs that will come with sustainability, clearly.
Okay, thank you for that, Alexis. And it just brings me on to Mau, and you're very welcome. Alex is talking there about, big global companies and, the margins that are there for them. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what is the right negotiating level for your products? We know that distributors in Europe are joining forces to form buying groups in order to negotiate with major food groups. But should we favour, maintaining the more regional level? Well,
as said, the common market, the single market, has brought major benefits to all the actors in the supply chain, and also for farmers, of course. European Union and its agricultural policy is clearly positive for Europe, European agriculture and European farmers. However, retailers have taken advantage of these great market opportunities over the past few decades. The substantial growth of retailers has further strengthened its contractual power over upstreams actors, and first of them, farmers. And the situation today is asymmetry, huge asymmetry, significant different levels of negotiating power and economic imbalance between individual trade relations. And farmers simply can't survive in this imbalance situation, and they have to get to another negotiating level. The tool to achieve this are POs, so producers' organization, and APOs, Association of Producers' Organization, to be able to counterbalance this large-scale retail at a regional, at a national and transnational, so European level. Yeah.
So I wonder, is that, kind of throwing in the towel by farmers, small farmers, that the only way to survive into the future is to scale up or join forces?
Yeah, and I will add that, as Alan Matthews said, we have other problems to address, and the European Common Market and the European POs and APOs as at the center of this system have succeeded in combining both competitiveness and sustainability. European Association of Producers not only enable farmers to counterbalance this asymmetry we've been talking about, but furthermore, they, with their financial help, they create efficiency, production better adapted to the demand, more value in the products, more income for producers, and also fair prices for the consumers. The collective operational programs can help produce decreasing cost. We've been discussing this with Professor Matthews before. The farmers in those collective groups can then invest in research. They invest in market analysis, in innovation, in adaptation of quality and quantity to the markets. And so they better respond to the market demand and to the market needs with better competitiveness, and best value in the products.
Okay. All right. You're taking all that on board, Alexis. I'm taking notes there of what has been said. Do we have any questions from the floor? Just raise your hand, please. Is somebody over here? And introduce yourself. Press your mic on. Yes? Sorry. thought somebody raised their hand there. I put on my different glasses. Do we... Anne-Laure, do we have any questions from online?
No, we don't.
Oh, everybody's really satisfied. Everyone's really satisfied with what's been said. So I'll give you another opportunity here in the room to put a question to our panel. If not, Alexis, do you want to maybe respond to what was being said there by Marion?
Actually, I may surprise you, but I agree with a lot of what she says. I mean, the model that we have in the retail sector, in our membership, groups of independent retailers, is a cooperative model. That means that you had hundreds, sometimes thousands of SME retailers who have joined forces to try to build up something in common, cooperate, mutualize investment in innovation, in new technologies, in robotics, investment to try to support with skills the entrepreneurs. And thanks to that cooperative spirit and that cooperative structure, they manage to shield the market forces, to be shielded from market forces and be competitive against much larger groups, against much larger big suppliers active globally. So there's a big lesson that we see from the retail sector is that this cooperative organization, if it's much more structured and used at the producer level or at the farming level, we see there's an opportunity clearly for the farmers to actually develop economies of scale, new efficiencies that will help them to basically to be more protected against market forces and actually also to match the big bargaining power of some of their buyers. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, come in there.
I wanted to go back to the price issue because one element that often is not considered is that the price that we pay today in the supermarket as consumers does not reflect the true cost. There has been a very interesting report published by the FAO last year that unveiled the true cost of a food system. So basically today the reason why certain food is at low prices is because externalities are not internalized. So, and I mean costs for health, cost for the environment. But we as consumers, as citizens, are paying anyway those costs via our taxes, via the healthcare costs, via the pollution, water rate, etc. So we are paying in a way. And what's also interesting is that for high-income countries, 70% of these hidden costs of a food system are linked to unhealthy diet. So actually there is really an economic case for policies that make it easier for consumers to eat healthily and sustainably. And the other element I wanted to mention, because we discussed competitiveness, but mostly within the EU, but we also need to think of trade. And one of the main demands from farmers during the protests that took place over the past month and weeks was the need for a level playing field in trade, but that has been something that also consumer organizations have been calling for quite some time. We have been calling for mirror measures or import requirements, basically to make sure that the food that we import into the EU complies with EU rules and standards. And there is really strong demand. 78% of consumers, for instance, would support that animal product that we import into the EU complies with our rules for animal welfare. So these are also elements that I think we need to take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you both, because I just wanted to talk about an example that really illustrates what you both said, and it's about the Moroccan tomatoes. The Moroccan tomatoes is really a good example to discuss together, I think. Tomato is one of the most produced vegetables in the EU, but the EU clearly drifts toward dependency on supply. Morocco origin represents 61% of tomato imports into the EU, and the standards are, of course, not the same. And as you talked about indirect costs, Camille, Moroccan tomato production is increased from 350,000 tons imported in Europe to more than 500,000 tons last year. And on the shelves all year long, also when we can produce them in European countries. With Morocco tomatoes have not the same costs as the one we produce in Europe. For example, very low cost of labor. You were talking about it. We have in Europe 14 euro an hour cost of labor, while there are less than €1 labor cost in Morocco. They have, of course, not the same environmental standards. And the result on the shelves is that the consumers don't even can clearly see where the tomatoes come from. The origin is written very on the small characters, and I'm sure that if the consumers knew how those tomatoes were produced, they will have another choice.
Do you think that the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, any of you, do you think that that will address those issues in terms of labour, number one? And are you saying as well that mirror clauses are absolutely vital for free trade agreements?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that with the producer organization and the operational programs, we can spend money on the upstream of the chain of the food chain, yes, and help producers produce better with environmental care and all those things we want to have as a food production model in Europe, and not importing the production and exporting the problems.
Okay, on that, Alexis, can I come back to you? I mean, at the end of the day, it's through retailers that we buy these our food in most cases, and there is that worry and concern from farmers, and you talked about globalisation earlier on, that if retailers are able to source food that's cheaper from outside the EU that may not meet the same sort of standards expected of European farmers, that, you know, is their attitude, well, we got to look after our margins and we don't really care?
Well, to start with, I mean, I think it's important to really stress that groups of independent retailers, they have a very strong engagement to make sure that what ends up in their shelves predominantly comes from not only national suppliers, but also local suppliers. I mean, we have a handful of examples from, I don't know how many retail chains in our memberships, I mean, cooperative chains, where they have basically labels to guarantee that the food that is on the shelf, the fresh food, the fresh vegetables, comes from local producers. I mean, if I take, for instance, Les Mousquetaires in France, they have a specific label called Producteur d'ici, which is guaranteeing that the fruits and vegetables which are in the shop itself do not come from further than 70 kilometers away. You have groups like Edeka, who have regional wholesalers who organize specific labels to make sure that their local producers actually have their products on the shelves of the local supermarkets from that regions. There are many such examples. If you look at fresh products, the vast majority of fresh products are usually sourced nationally and in groups of independent retailers, even locally, because groups of independent retailers mean that the local retailer is an independent entrepreneur and he can have his own contract with the local farmer if he wishes so, and many do so. So that's a first element. Second element is that I talked a lot about fresh products. You do not have as much visibility, of course, when you're buying products from a global company. That's something that if you're asking much more details, that's suddenly much more of a black box, obviously. Lastly, we should not forget that you still need trade for some products. So it's not a question necessarily of margin, unless you suddenly make the prices of food skyrocket across the chain. Then you would definitely have retailers maybe thinking twice what they have to do in light of negative consumer reaction on prices. But outside of that, you also have many cases where you have fruits and vegetables that sometimes are not produced in sufficient quantities in Europe. So, of course, there's then the question of how much of a level playing field you have between European and non-European production. And as groups of independent retailers, our members are very much welcoming mirror clauses that were mentioned by Dirk, actually. Every time you have a risk of substitution, you should ensure that you have a level playing field, certainly. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you all maybe 30 seconds take-home message. But before that, Camille, I just want to come to you because, you know, farmers get very upset when they hear about, you know, low price wars and below-cost selling. And I know that the Commission have talked about tackling unfair trading practices now as part of the revision of farmers and so on. But the question that I have for you is, I mean, who's leading here? Is it the retailers are leading consumers or consumers leading retailers when it comes to these sort of practices?
It's like the chicken and egg dilemma. Well, I mentioned earlier the role of food environment, and I think it's been quite extensively researched that the middle of the chain, and that includes retailers, have a huge influence on what we as consumers purchase. So, of course, we often hear about educating consumers, informing consumers. We ourselves advocate for better labeling. That's very important. But so long as it's cheaper to eat unhealthy food, that is advertised everywhere, including to our children, then it's very difficult to expect consumers. It's almost, I would say, unfair to expect them to make the healthiest choice once in the shop. So there is really a lot of work to be done there. And as you mentioned, prices, and I would like to say that we also welcome the upcoming initiative from the Commission regarding an observatory on production costs and margins, because it's indeed, for us, an open debate. I listened to what Alan said earlier, but there is still a bit of, at least suspicion in terms of who is taking how much of the cake along the chain. So at least for consumers, it would be interesting to know and important to know where the money they pay at the supermarket goes, whether it goes to the farmers, to the processors, to the retailers, or whether it's just equitably shared and there is nothing to be discussed about. Thank you.
Okay, we are over time, but I'm going to give you, as I said, just 30 seconds for a take-home message from today. So I'll begin with you, Maya.
Well, I think you understood that we are talking about collective organisation, and I think we still have a lot to do inside the production sector to organise ourselves and to gather in producers organisation, AOP, and also at the European level.
Okay, Alexis?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important indeed to look at the entire supply chain. We talked a lot about retailers, we talked a lot about producers, but it's just one tiny bit of the whole story. Because if you look at the overall production of food in Europe, just less than half ends up in retail in the end. And more than half that goes elsewhere. Export, hospitality, restaurants, catering, etc. So the whole chain is concerned. So if you're focusing exclusively on retail where you have low margins, you are missing a large part of the picture, because you're basically looking at a tiny bit that has little influence on the overall revenue of farmers overall. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Finally,
I think I would like to take a step back and maybe look at one of the reasons why the Farm to Fork strategy maybe could not be implemented and delivered as it was supposed to be. There was a lot of focus on the supply side, but not so much on the demand side. And we need to make sure that obviously demand matches supply. So for the next European Commission, what we would hope for is that much more will be done to support consumer in eating more sustainably. Science is clear as to what needs to be done, so we just now need to make it happen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and you all did very well in that 30 seconds. And I want to thank you all for coming here today. I know you've travelled a great journey, so thank you, Myriam, thank you, Camille, and thank you to Alexis. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for that. Okay, we're going to move on to our second round table now. And when the Treaties of Rome were signed in March 1957, who could have envisaged the development of the European project, particularly the harmonisation of rules governing food production through the birth of the CAP some years after that? The now EU has evolved to a union of 450 million citizens and a little under 9 million farms. To underpin the safe and secure supply of food, the Common Agricultural Policy is, as we know, a vital support for farmers. But with the big challenges in the world we now live in today, what will the farm structure be like? Will the family farm model be replaced by something bigger as we move into the future and something more intensive? And that's just perfect timing to have the little change of the guard up here at the top table, because I'm delighted to welcome our second panel. Jean-Luc Demarty needs little introduction in this part of the world. He's former Director General for Trade in the Commission. Prior to that, he was Director General in charge of Agriculture and Rural Development. And he's also served served in several senior management functions in DG Agri and in the DG for Research. His career in the EU institutions began in 1988 as advisor to the President of the Commission, the late Jacques Delors. So Jean-Luc, you're very welcome. Gert-Jan Noplat is a Dutch entrepreneur, farmer and politician. He comes from a farming background and served as chairman of the Dutch Poultry Farmers Union for 7 years. And in 2022, he was elected as president of AVAC, which is the European umbrella body for poultry producers. He's been a member of the House of Representatives in the Netherlands as well from 1998 to 2006. And he was elected to the Dutch Senate in June 2023. And in his spare time likes to do some singing, am I right? And finally, we have Dražen Kurile, who is president of the Poultry Committee of HPK, which is the Croatian Chamber for Agriculture. He, along with his sister Ivana, run an egg and poultry business in the Ludbreg region in Croatia, which he began in 2009. But before that, I do believe didn't have necessarily an agricultural background, was more of a business background. And his reason for going into agriculture was simple: we will always need food, even in a crisis. And of course, we had the economic crisis when the business started in 2009. And your company is the largest exporter of consumer eggs in Croatia. So you're all very welcome indeed. Jean-Luc, if I can begin with you, as somebody that witnessed the transformation of the Common Agricultural Policy over the years, including the McSharry reforms through to decoupling and the beginning of convergence, when you look at EU agricultural policy now, and specifically the role of CAP in supporting farm incomes, affordable food for consumers and protecting the environment, is it fit for purpose in its current guise? Does it need another transformation?
I've been associated closely to all the reform during the last 30 years. My feeling that we did the right reform in 92, 2003 and further. I'm much more sceptical about the initial part of the Green Deal, because not so much because of the measures in the Green Deal, but because of the unilateral aspects of the Green Deal. Because when we are looking at the effect of the Green Deal, it would decrease the production relatively dramatically, while the rest of the world is not doing a lot. And at the end of the day, when consumption is not moving a lot, for example, in meat, the effect will be that will be more imports. So I don't think it would be necessarily so good. But in reality, I think the fact that we have moved in this direction of closer to the market, in reality, was good. When you look at the effects in terms of farm income, as Alan Matthew has shown, it was reasonably good. It could perhaps have been better. In terms of structure of production, we have modernized. It's clear we have still many small farms, but many of these small farms, let's be clear, are not viable. Semi-subsistent farms, and it's clear that I don't believe in the future of all these small farms.
Has EU policy failed those farms?
So I think I think economically it's not something which is which can work. So at the end of the day, it's normal to a certain extent to support these people, but at the end of the day, we have to favorize competitiveness. It's clear we need also some small farms. They can be part-time farms, hobby farms, but we have also to move in the direction of farms of sufficient size. I'm in favor of family farming, not industrial farming, and we have not. In Europe, we have not industrial farming, contrary to what some people say, or very limited. So we have not exaggerate. In the United States, yes, we have some industrial farming, which is not very good in my view, for example, on beef, these horrible feedstocks in US. But in Europe, we have not this type of approach. So we have to be reasonable, but we have also to promote farms of sufficient size.
Okay, you just mentioned there about the Green Deal, and obviously farmers are probably the first victims of climate destruction and so on, and we see that in my own country at the moment with the incessant rain that we're having. But there is, talk about the CAP policy not being used, that it should be ring-fenced for its initial purpose, food production and low prices, and that maybe there should be a third pillar introduced to support farmers in terms of dealing with protecting biodiversity and protecting the environment. What do you think of that?
But basically we are going this direction because we have first what was introduced, the GAEC, the Good Agricultural Environment Practice, which have to be respected to receive the income support. You have the eco-regime, you have the agri-environment regime. All these things could be improved in the future. There will be probably more linked to environment. But at the end of the day, there is a link between these 40 billion farm income, farm subsidies given directly to the farmers. There is also other subsidies, but I'm evoking the 40 billion annual farm income support, which is basically compensating farmers for the additional cost. And also vis-à-vis the rest of the world, which is perhaps we should discuss also the mirror clause when I have some issue to say of the free trade agreement, where the lots of things are said which are not accurate. And at the end of the day, when we look at, we are going in the right direction. The question, are we going fast enough? Okay, perhaps not. But we cannot fast alone. That would be my main message. Even the best in the world on that, the New Zealander, which are at the same time very good in ag production, animal products, and good also in climate change adaptation and mitigation, they have also problems to get the right path.
Well, can I just, and I will come to my other panellists, but just since you mentioned it about free trade agreements, you were in trade as well. If we look at Mercosur, which is probably the most famous free trade agreement that's on the table at the moment, it's still stuttering along, and there's still a split in Europe in terms of whether we should proceed with it or not. What's your own view in that regard?
But first we have to look at the global issue of free trade agreement in general. So we have moved after 2008, the big failure of the WTO Doha negotiation. I was part of the negotiation at that moment. We have moved to a network of ambitious free trade agreement since 2008. And when we look at the results, they have been, contrary to what it said, in very many places, in particular in my native country, it's presented as a failure and something which has not been good for agriculture. When we look at the results, the balance, the trade balance in ag and processed products, ag processed products in Europe, in EU, has moved from plus 10 billion to 70 billion. So we improve our position by 60 billion in agriculture. So it shows that it has not been not at the bad results some people are pretending. And also we are forgetting that we have also a very ambitious chapter in terms of sustainable development, in terms of respecting the main environment multilateral agreements. We have also to respect the key conventions of BIT, and labor organization, OIT in French, and it's very important. And we have forced some partners like Korea, for example, to ratify some OIT key conventions. So something we have been very successful. So these things are very often forgotten. So that's for the global picture. And for Mercosur as such, I think what people forget that there is a very important interest for Europe in Mercosur. We have lost market share in Mercosur, 50% of market share in Mercosur, moving from 38% to 18% in 20 years. Because of the place of China, because we had no free trade agreements with Mercosur. While we other Latin America, we have free trade agreement, we have maintained our market share. So it's very, very impressive. But we have to say that, and including Mercosur, where agriculture is never an adjustment variable. We have never sacrificed agriculture to in negotiations. So people saying that we are doing that clearly are not telling the truth. And I can prove it, but perhaps I should free the speech for others, but I can come back to that if you wish, because I think I have convincing arguments on that.
Okay, well, one way of holding the audience is to say we'll hold that until later and they'll stay with us to hear what you have to say. But I do know where you're coming from in terms of farmers that are worried, particularly the beef producers, and my country the same have the similar concerns. Okay,
I would say a word on that on beef. I think it's important to clarify the situation. In all our free trade negotiation, where we are negotiating with a country or group of countries which are very competitive in agriculture, in particular in sensitive products for us, like beef, poultry, sugar, we are very much limiting. There is never full liberalization. We are very much limiting imports through very tight tariff quota. And in Mercosur, these tariff quota are representing only 1% of full domestic consumption of the EU. And it's clear that beef, there will be some negative effects, but they are much more limited than people are saying, and we can deal with that with some complementary support for beef farmers, which could be quite manageable.
Yeah, I think it's 99,000 tonnes is the one.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jean-Luc, and thank you for patiently waiting to my other two guests. Trazan, we've been hearing about, the problems about EU policy, how, there's imbalances there affecting the entire food chain, and the common agricultural policy. The question, is it fit for purpose? Alan Matthews addressed a lot of the issues around pricing and so on. But you're the newest member of the Union. You're also the newest member of the Eurozone as well. What difference have you seen? What has been the impact of joining the EU and becoming part of EU policy for farmers in general in your country?
First of all, when we joined the EU, our production went down drastically because we imported a lot. We still import a lot, but now things have changed a bit. The poultry sector is the strongest one in all of the meat sectors. Regarding milk, we are at 40% of self-sufficiency. Pork, pig meat is around 60%, beef 65%, but with eggs, we are over 90% self-sufficient, and with poultry meat, chicken meat, we are over 90% as well. What we have seen in the past 6 years, since MHP has bought Perutnina Ptuj, it's a company producing chicken meat in Slovenia, and they also have a company in Croatia. They are strong on the market, they are building new farms, and they are changing what we are talking about, how the future of farms will look like, because since now poultry meat is produced the way that small farmers have 1 or maybe 2 houses with 20,000 chickens, and then they are given the day-old chicks, the feed and everything they need from the bigger companies which slaughter and process the chickens. But now MHP is building their own farms. They are doing it on 3 locations at the moment, but as you may also have read in the media, not only MHP, but there's another company also from Ukraine. They don't do anything with poultry for now, but they also want to do some mega projects. It's in the same area in Croatia, which was heavily hit by an earthquake 4 years ago, and they want to build, each of these companies, 95 million broilers in 12 farms. So Croatia now produces around 45 million broilers a year, and they want to build 190 million more. For that, they say they will source local workers, but I'm in this business, so I know it's not true.
Is that going to be at the expense of smaller producers?
Yes, the smaller producers are really afraid, not only in Croatia, but also in Slovenia and Austria, because they cannot compete with such companies at such scale. It's not possible.
And just before I move on to Gert-Jan, you and your sister run a business. We were talking about industrial farming earlier and family farming, and where is the divide? At what point does family become industrial? How would you describe your business?
I run a farm with 144,000 layers. With my sister, we produce around 40 million eggs per year. So it's not a small family farm. It's too big to sell eggs on the local farmers market, but we sell to the supermarkets and some even we export. And we abide the high standards in the EU, not only in Croatia, but we do OKT, Ohne Kükentoten, like they do in Germany or in France. So we try to abide to the highest levels of production possible.
Okay. Gert-Jan, you're president, as I said, of the European Poultry Association and a member of the farmer supporting BBB party in the Netherlands. I suppose it's a cheeky question to start with, but which represents your members and farmers better?
Of course, AFIC, because they have the interest in the whole of the European Union, and I'm working in the Netherlands as a senator just for the Dutch voters for BBB. And it's not only the farmers. If we would go by the farmers, we only would have half a seat. So we have a lot of citizens and civilians who voted for us because we have 17 seats. So.
But is that a sign, though, and we're seeing it with the farm protests, that maybe, and again, I'm, I suppose, being treading carefully here in saying this, but is it that farmers feel that they're not being properly represented by farm organisations and that they need to turn to people power and to political parties to actually hear what they have to say?
This is what happened in the Netherlands. It was a discussion on nitrogen. Yeah. They were not properly heard, and farmers went on the roads protesting, and they got a lot of support from the people in the rural areas. Otherwise, we did not become from one day to the other the biggest party in the Netherlands. So there's a lot of support from citizens in rural areas for our farmers. Can I come back to the questions we were talking about? First of all, thank you for having me here. And I was interested in what Mr. Dimitri just said about Mercosur. I have another opinion. Maybe we can come back to it later. But what we need is reciprocity. I don't need that there are so many billions and we did so well. I need reciprocity. I want products who enter into the European Union should apply to the same standards as we produce. And then the poultry farmers, they don't get subsidies so much. It's a free way of producing. So they want to be protected, and protected does not mean with money only, but it means with reciprocity. We can compete with the world if we want, if we do it on the same standards. And I will go to my colleague from Croatia. He mentioned about the size of the farms. If you take a look at the farms into the European Union, and see that a European livestock farm has 34 hectares of agricultural land and a herd of 47 livestock units, the way he calls 47 cows. And if you transform that to chickens, that means that an average farm has in the European Union to broiler 6,721 broilers. And in the top 10 of the biggest farm producing countries, you see that they have 79 livestock units with 51 hectares of land. So that means 11,297 broilers. And if you see what happens in the Ukraine, and one of the most important ones is it's MHP over there. You mentioned that already too. They have farms with 2 million chickens each. They got 360,000 hectares of land. And a big farm in the Netherlands, you have really a huge, big poultry farm in the Netherlands, broilers have 200,000 chickens. So it's 10 times as big as it. So the model they have goes against both the citizen demands and the principles of the Green Deal. We are forced into a Green Deal. Now I think it's dying a little bit now, the Green Deal. You get politicians speak themselves a little bit out. But it's totally different. So
what's driving it then?
Sorry?
What is driving, this scaling up like this then, if you're saying that, consumers don't want, what is the reason behind it? And everybody is going to get bigger rather than smaller.
Yes, but the Green Deal, they want us to force us to get more extensive. They got in a romantic way. They want to make us smaller, less production. But the whole world is changing. This is totally, if you take a look at the world, that the same European Commission brings out figures that the world is going from 7 billion to 9.8 billion people in the year 2050. And the same European Commission say we need 5% more poultry meat in the EU to the year 2030. The world needs 22% more poultry meat till the year 2030. And to the year 2050, even 40%. So the Green Deal, we went in the wrong way. We don't want the way of producing like MHP do, but it will disrupt the total market. But we have to find a balance. And the balance we have to find together with, I saw some representatives of the Eurogroup of Animals, Kope Košek, I have seen, we have to make a bound to make a food strategy so we can protect our farms and we farmers and food producers that do not depend on other countries. We have seen what happened after the terrible invasion and aggression of Russia into Ukraine. We are totally depending on energy on other countries. What happened? The prices went up. So we need a food strategy and protect our borders more by reciprocity, not only the money.
Okay, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But any questions in the room here? Anybody? We have some questions on. We have a question over here. Yes, sorry. Hi. Please introduce yourself and let us know what your question is and to whom. Thank you.
Hi, I'm from European Coordination Via Campesina. We represent small and medium-scale farmers. And I think you asked what's driving farms to get bigger. And there was also the mention of kind of, I think from Mr. Damati, that we don't have industrial farming in Europe. But I think that given the number of falling farms that we have seen in Europe, we see that policy in Europe is driving an industrialised model, that we see that farmers are trying to get bigger to survive. And I think that Alan made some interesting points about large farms tend to have income that is okay. And I think we have to ask ourselves why this is. I think Camille mentioned this also, that there are certain hidden costs to these large production models and to these industrialised models that are, in terms of kind of social conditionality, the human rights violations that happen in industry models of agricultural workers. Also in terms of the impact on biodiversity of large models. And so for me, I think that this question of what is the future of EU farming, we also have to kind of look at what kind of future we want. In your introduction of one of the speakers, we said that food is, that we're always going to need food. But I think there's a lot of farmers who have taken to the streets because they are on the ground working and their realities are not being reflected in European policy, which for a lot of small-scale farmers is what's driving this industrialised model.
Okay, I'll take that as a point, and a point very well made. And Lou, do we have some questions from online?
Yes, we do. I have a question online for Drazen. You mentioned earlier that the mega projects under development in Croatia will not employ local workers. Why? And do you know what will be the nationality of these workers?
MHP operates now in Croatia. They have a slaughterhouse and they work in cooperation because they bought an older company, and they now have 40% of foreign workers working for them. And it's difficult to find farm workers in Croatia at the moment. In the last 3 years, things have changed rapidly. We have had before maybe 40,000 international workers, mostly from Bosnia, Serbia, and local countries. This year we had 170,000 foreign workers, mostly from India, Nepal, Philippines, and the projections are that in the next 5 years we will have almost 500,000 foreign workers. And in the plans of these mega projects, it can be seen that they plan to build housing for 3,000 workers, so nobody from Croatia will move. Everybody from Croatia is leaving this area where the farms are being built because it's a poor area, so I don't think workers will come to this area from different parts of Croatia just to work at a poultry farm.
So any idea where these workers...
The nationalities mostly now is from Nepal or India. Mostly from Nepal they come.
Okay, thank you for that question. We're coming close to the end, but I'll go back to you, Monsieur Lamarty. You were saying that you had some other points to make in relation to trade, and having listened to what our colleagues are saying about the future, and indeed the lady in the audience there about small farms being squeezed out at the expense of farmers getting bigger. I mean, when you joined the Commission, there was probably 3, 4, 5 times as many farms in Europe, or farmers in the 27 than there are today. It's rapidly decreasing.
Yeah. Yes, but it's not necessarily bad if people who are living farming are treated humanly, have some jobs. And that's what has been done in the past. So that's the key issue here. I agree with Mr. Opplat, not everything he has said, but we don't want MHP model, which is certainly, in my view, an honorable model. That's in the industrial farming. We need modern and competitive family farms. I would like to come back what the lady said about the respect of biodiversity and other elements. I have to recall that there is a GAEC, which is the farm support, the income support, suppose that the good agricultural environment conditions are respected, including biodiversity. And I also recall that the Biodiversity Convention is part of the Sustainable Development chapter. I would like to come back briefly on the issue of mirror clause. I think we have to clarify the issue because it's clear that we have mirror clause on everything which is linked to health. No product can enter into the EU market if it does not respect the phytosanitary standards. No product can enter in the EU market if it is produced through hormones, through antibiotics. I agree that I agree, I know the fact. I know that there would be some improvement, some more control on that in Europe and in the third countries. But also there is also some mirror clause on that, including also on pesticide. When products are produced with pesticide forbidden in Europe for health reasons, the products cannot enter practically de facto on the EU market. But we have to also to be realistic and serious. The total reciprocity would mean, full reciprocity would mean that we are liberalizing fully agriculture, and there would be, in this case, a rationale for full mirroring. And in this case also, there will be rationale with full mirroring with no income support too. So full level playing field, if we put that to the extreme, that's what will be the rationale. While in reality, we have to recall that we cannot impose to the third country to have exactly the same production methods than we are applying in Europe, including environment, except if they don't respect the Paris Agreement on climate change. Because in reality, we are limiting strongly for our sensitive products the access for their products. So we cannot ask them to have exactly the same level of production methods, the same production methods that we are using in Europe. And that's precisely why we have this income support of 40 billion yearly to compensate the difference of production cost and the difference of standards. So we cannot have, as we say in French, we cannot have the butter and the money for the butter.
Okay. I actually think it's more than 40 billion. Is it not more 60, 70 billion now?
No, I'm evoking the global budget is around 60. Okay. But I'm evoking only the income support plus the eco regime, So that was the so-called first pillar of the CAP.
Okay. Now we are running out of time. Jan, I'll let you respond, and then one final point for, before we finish. Yep.
Thank you very much. You already mentioned that probably there are some standards they do not comply with, like antibiotic. Also on salmonella, EFSA just brought out a report that it's in the early days, 2 years ago, they found out that by sequencing the meat from Ukraine had a lot of salmonella. It was 2 or 3 weeks ago also in the media. And when I take a look, what I mean with reciprocity is that they have to comply with our standards. We need 100% control on the borders. Maybe it's not possible, maybe you take only 10%, but we need 100% control on the borders. Because in other countries, they use antibiotics we do not use, like in Brazil. They use, but the products enter into our markets. We force our farmers not to use, they don't want to use. We are very successful in reducing 80 to 90%, Netherlands, France, Italy, and there's some more examples. So it can't be that it comes in. On Mercosur, I think Mercosur should go in Estrella, because we import in the European Union 850,000 tons of poultry meat every year. Mercosur would bring us 180,000 tons extra. 18,000 tons in the Chile agreement, and the full liberalization we had with Ukraine was 227,000 tons. No farmer can hold their farms anymore if we do not close the borders for productions who do not deal with our standards and go back to the quota that they have. Thank you.
I would like to add to answer.
Very briefly.
Because
yes.
I have to recall that for all the sensitive products, there is not only this limit of 1% of domestic consumption for Mercosur, but all our free trade agreements have the origin of this limit. For all our past, present, and future free trade agreements, which for sensitive products, it should never be more than 4% of our domestic consumption. I agree with Ukraine is a big problem. And I don't defend what the Commission has done with Ukraine, full liberalization. If I would have been Director General for Trade at that moment, I would have fought like hell against that.
Okay, all right, we're going to leave it there. Drazen, just finally to you.
That sounds good.
As a poultry producer in Croatia, it's great to have peace here. Are you confident about the future of your business? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Do you see yourself and your sister still doing what you're doing?
Hopefully so. It will be demanding for sure. It has been from COVID crisis to Ukraine crisis. Every day something new. We had a fipronil with the eggs and in the EU, and luckily not in Croatia. But every year brings something new. But I agree with Mr. Oplat that we have to defend what we have, and we can see in Croatia maybe what's happening if we don't have quotas or tariffs, like with Ukraine. MHP is now delivering corn from Ukraine. They are not buying locally, so local producers don't have the silos to store it like they did before, and it's becoming a problem, and it can only become a bigger and bigger issue.
Okay. On that note, we're going to leave this round table. I want to thank you all very much for joining us and giving us your views. Thank you to our panellists. So at this stage, will propose, we should give you a round of applause like everybody else. Much appreciated. We're just going to take a very short break. 10 minutes, 10-minute break, just a comfort break, and do rejoin us for our final round table, and then we have Mr. Busher to kind of give us his own opinion on what he's heard here today. Thank you. Okay, could we ask everybody to resume with your seats? Can we please ask you to resume, take your seats?
Excuse me, we've got just a technical problem, very short one, for the connection of Miss Christina Lasso-Sans on the machine.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you're very welcome back. Can I have your attention, please? And to those of you online, thank you for your patience as well. We have arrived at our final round table, and then we'll have a summary from Mr. Boucher later on the proceedings of the day. So without further ado, I do know we have one of our final participants online who we're trying to connect with at the moment, but we're doing our best in that regard. So our first two round tables have thrown up many different opinions about the future of food production, the landscape for food producers, the expectation of consumers and retailers, and how the entire system should transition in order to meet the targets of emissions reductions, increasing demand for food globally, food security, environmental, social and economic sustainability, and quality produce at an affordable price. It's a lot of boxes to try and tick all at the one time. A lot of circles to be squared there. Okay, so to my final panel. Here beside me is Remy Cristoforetti, who's the director of Gousson Cooperative, which today is a company with more than 4,500 members and 850 employees in Brittany and the greater west of France area, with a focus on animal nutrition and livestock management. And he's also president of the Federation of ABAA, which is a group of food companies in that region. Faustine Bass de Fosse is European Environmental Bureau Director for Nature, Health and Environment. With more than 15 years of professional experience in EU environmental policy, she leads a large policy portfolio of the organisation, namely in biodiversity, water, soil, agriculture and food, chemicals, mercury and air quality and noise, as she is part of the senior management team. So you don't get much time for sleep, it seems, with all of those responsibilities. Patrick Pagani is the current Acting Director General for COPA and COGECA, the European umbrella body representing farmer and cooperative organisations across Europe. He has been a senior policy advisor with COPA COGECA since 2021 across a range of policy areas, and he has a degree in law. And joining us online is Cristina Lasso-Sanz, who is Deputy Head of Unit at DG Health and Food Safety, which is the DG responsible for EU policy on food safety and health and for monitoring the implementation of related laws, where Cristina is acting head of unit. So you're all very welcome. We have about 25 minutes or so just to, I suppose, get your opinions. You've all been here listening to proceedings so far. Maybe if I begin with you, Faustine, you have been listening to what we've been saying over the last 2 hours or so. What is your response?
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, just to say who we are. So the European Environmental Bureau is the largest federation of environmental NGOs. We have around 180 members in 40 countries in the EU, but also beyond. And together we represent the voice of around 30 million of citizens. How can I start? I must say that I'm a little bit puzzled, if not shocked, by what has been said before and the fact that it is in complete contradiction with what science is telling us today. Science is clear. Food system is unsustainable. Our food system is unsustainable. Last September, there was a publication from the Stockholm Resilience Centre which alerted us that we had crossed 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries. Now you don't need to have the Fields Medal to understand that we are in trouble and that we really need to urgently reverse the trends. Just to go through the facts, because I think it's very important to be reminded of them. First of all, our level of animal proteins consumption today is unsustainable, and this is clearly reported in science. Our health is under threat. Poor nutrition is a leading cause of non-communicable diseases, which itself account for 90% of all deaths in Europe. Not only our food system is making us sick, but it is also depleting the natural resources that agriculture production rely upon. 60 to 70% of soils are in unhealthy state. These are the official figures from the European Commission, from the EU. And it is sad to say that there was a piece of law that has been discussed and adopted actually yesterday, which has been unfortunately dismantled or reduced in terms of ambition. Insects have been drastically declining in the last decade to alarming rates, and this has also driven the loss of birds. 500 million of birds have disappeared in the last 40 years. But of course, you know, these are also threats, as I said, to agriculture production itself, because as I said, you know, agriculture is relying on these natural resources and healthy natural resources. Now this is being exacerbated by climate change. Climate change is worsening at fast pace. You must have all seen the report from the European Environmental Agency, the Climate Risk Assessment, which has stated that Europe is the fastest warming continent in the world. So we have to move fast, and going slow is not going to help.
Can I ask you, Faustine, is there an
Sorry. Our food system is also defined by stark inequalities, with people who are over-consuming and some who are actually not able to afford, many of them, a quality meal every second day. And last but not least, we are throwing 20% of the food that we eat. So we have a food system problem. It is quite clear, and it is scientifically reported. And the only way to tackle it, and I think it is also how we can join, like link the different panels that we had today, is to tackle both consumption and production at the same time, because they are two sides of the same coin across the value chain. And in that picture, the Common Agricultural Policy is a tool. It's not an end in itself. It's a tool that could, if well designed, help the transition. But until now, unfortunately, it has not, and it has fostered statu quo rather than a transition.
Okay, and I know you pointed the finger there at animal production. Is there an acceptable level of animal production into the future then?
Well, we need to look at what science is telling us, I mean, we need to reduce our consumption. Look, we need to look at the figure. And there are many reports that are out there that are telling us what are the...
That's a problem that farmers have, that they hear, the points that you make very clearly, but they say, well, where does this end? Where does it begin and where does it end? And are there enough impact assessments done on reaching the point that you're talking about, in terms of the impact and the knock-on effect for farmers in rural areas?
But that's why we need to think in terms of transition, and that's why, the Common Agricultural Policy, but also the whole food system needs to change to help farmers with that transition. Okay. For sure, there will be loser and winner in a transition, but not changing because of the cost of the change is not going to help. It's just the costs are just going to increase because the cost of inaction are huge.
Okay. Patrick, maybe I'll just bring you in there to respond as representative of the farm unions in Europe.
Sorry. There we go. No, thanks first for also Patrick Pagani. Thanks for the invitation also to represent European farmers. It's good to have a debate on which brings different opinions, which in our view, a peace debate missed particularly in the last 5 years. So this, I think, is important to put it back, and we are seeing also bringing back the idea to have a dialogue with no polarization. So this is one of the main objectives, but okay, we'll maybe discuss later. On the figures, I think one figure, so agriculture represents 10% of the EU emissions. There's a 90% which is outside of all this. So this is an element that needs to be considered. I don't think all what you said, we can have different figures, should be blamed or can be blamed on the farming sector. I think it's it's not the right way to put it. I think there is a transition which is ongoing, and there is a path that needs to be put in place. This is one of the key elements. So how to reach this path? The EU set a clear path of 2050, climate neutrality. How do we arrive there to those zero emissions? Agriculture is already doing a strong contribution. If we see emissions reduced from 1990, we are 20%, and more are planned. So the issue is how we manage this in a context with a global world population who is rising and to 9 billion of people in 2050. So who will feed this population in this context? Referring to the Common Agricultural Policy and what you mentioned on the new proposals coming from the Commission, I think it's a wrong narrative to think that it's a complete scrap of the current CAP. There are targeted modifications. The objectives of the CAP, the direction is that. What has been overlooked in this respect has been clearly how to implement the first year of the CAP. A new SCP, which in the first year and clearly brought more administrative burden to farmers. And the new context. What I don't hear here is all the new context. A context of polycrisis, a context where we had COVID, where thanks to the farmers, to the food chain, when we were stuck, I was stuck with kids, farmers were outside producing. We had a war dramatic war, which had to last 3 days. We are still there in this situation. So with all the consequences on food, energy price. And it was interesting discussion with Alan before on the consequence and the extreme increase of prices, also inputs. So farmers, how can they cope with this, and how can they cope with extreme also weather events? So farmers are enterprise with open with no roof. So how to deal with this? It's not an automatic plus and minus. It's a difficult job.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. And I'll let Faustina come back in to answer some of the points that you're making there as well in a while. Remy, you've been here as well. You're involved in a big business working with farmers and producers in France. What do you make, I suppose, of what you've been hearing here today?
Just in a few words. You have a look of the presentation of Le Guessan. So Le Guessan is not a major company, but a middle-sized cooperative, which is focusing mainly on livestock. So I will answer to the positioning and the question answered by Faustine, but I think one of the key responsibilities we have to answer before to say that obviously we have to take care of the environment, but for me the first objective that we have to answer is United Nations #1 target, which is no hunger on the planet. We have still more than 400 million people that are not eating every day, and we have less than 1 billion people which are not covering their needs in terms of food every day. So this question has to be answered. So this is also one of the limits. So for sure, I will not answer, and Le Guessan will not feed the world, and Brittany will not feed the world. But as Europe, we have to answer to this question. And with humility, what we have decided to answer as a question within Le Guessan is accepting the fact that people will eat less meat. So we have taken the decision that we have to accept vegetalization of our cooperative and to have a different positioning. You will see we have, let's say, a positioning which is around, I will not gather with a lot of figures, but we have mainly 5-6% market share at French level in different areas, nearly all the different areas. We are quite advanced, for example, in positioning in organic. In organic, for example, the production of eggs for us in bio was more than 50% in 2019. And we are now on less than 25%, because we have to convert people back to free range, because the acceptance of consumer to pay the additional cost for organic was not acceptable. So when we look at this transition, we have clearly to look at, for sure, climate change and impact, but also condition. And the introduction of the professor at the beginning was really highlighting all this position and this transition. I will just follow and offer you the opportunity to read a good book in French. So you see a lot of French people today, so no matter what, I'm sure you will appreciate that. But Sébastien Abyss, let's say, asks the question in a different way. He says that we have to climb the Everest. We are in the middle of a situation where the overall population of the world will continue to increase. Every day we have something like 300,000 people more per day. And the question is that we have to deliver food for everybody. But the question is that, like for the Everest, we will go up and we will have less and less oxygen in order to make this food. The situation will be more complex. We will have, for sure, climate change. We will have a protein more expensive. We will have energy more expensive and so on. But we will have to answer to this question. And at the end, at the top, we will have to find a solution to be with a balanced and neutralized carbon footprint. This is the challenge we are facing. This is a major stake.
Okay, and very briefly, just a question. We haven't touched on generational renewal and young people turning away from farming, and I believe it's a particular problem in France as well. We have this increasing demand for food. We have this increasing demand to be kinder to the environment when it comes to food production and so on and so forth. Who's going to do that in the future?
For sure, I follow a bit the question about efficiency. So for sure, the question is a question about efficiency. It's not about industrialization, about farms and so on. And we have to think globally in terms of not only farms, but also transformation. Just to give you a rough idea, because we talk about some figures, but I think it's very interesting to have a simple size figures. When we speak, for example, of a farm with 200 sow, this is the definition of an industrial farm for most of NGO, and this is the new limit in order to have a complete authorization process with authorization process, public hearing, and so on in France. This is a 2-person farm. So this is one family with one couple. So a couple installing, developing a farm that give, let's say, a revenue for just 2 people as the complete and the complete process of authorization like a full industry with measurement of impact and so on and so on. And that's major. So for me, this is one of the key points. So, and in fact, the fact is that we decided within Le Guessan to do it with a lot of humility and, let's say, very operationally. So we have to take care of this process, make sure that we have the local acceptability and so on. We can support it. But we have to make sure that the process and the administration is really acceptable for these farmers. The other, let's say, the other part of the aspect is also people not coming from farm, from family. So the newcomers in farming. And we have to find a process in order to open them to let's say, to this context and this job. Sorry for
okay, no problem. I'm just conscious of time, and I do know that Christina Lassus-Sanz is patiently waiting online, and I hope we can link up with you, Christina. Thank you for joining us. I want to refer back to our last panel where we were talking about the unfairness of trade deals and the ability of the EU to enforce bans, on antibiotics and growth promoters and GMOs and whatever else you're having yourself that's coming into the EU. Are we capable of enforcing these bans? Is there a level playing pitch when it comes to what European farmers are asked and what is coming in from other parts of the world?
Hello, good evening everyone, and please forgive me for not being with you this afternoon, but it was really impossible for me. Your question is a very interesting one. We are all time refusing questions, refusing affirmation that our legislation allow to import products from third countries that meet different standards than our standards. Listen, our legislation is so our sanitary requirements are never negotiated, never. And I can say this in a first person because I have negotiated quite a lot of the agreements that now we have in place. And usually all the agreements include a clause saying that exporting countries shall ensure that the product exported to the Union meet all the EU import requirements. Requirements like the non-use of hormones for growth promoter. This is something, as you probably knows, that is a principle that we have defended and that we lost a panel in the WTO. However, we have maintained in this clause. We are paying an important amount of cost because of this, but we maintain. We are now our policy on veterinary medicines and the use of antibiotics for growth promoters or yield increase, and that we are applying exactly the same legislation that we apply in our member states. Something similar for those antibiotics that are reserved in the Union for human health, and the same can be said for the pesticide. You know that recently we have adopted some legislation applying environmental criteria for certain pesticides. But in all this, we cannot forget that we are on the framework of the WTO, of the World Trade Organizations and the rules that we have accepted to apply. And there are rules, for instance, we can apply rules for environmental criteria when this can affect the environment of the Union. But we cannot apply when we cannot require questions like this because they are not applying, they are not affecting the environment of the Union. Or matters like animal welfare, we can apply those that can really affect like transport or things like this, because this is included in the WTO. And I will put on this question, I will put a matter for reflection. What you will think if a country impose in the Union the requirements, for instance, that all meat produced in the Union should be halal or certified kosher. We will not accept this. We will immediately say to the other country, sorry very much, these are rules that are not related to health and that are not affecting down any of the points of the aspect that are referred in the GATT. We will not accept this. And we will not accept, for instance, that a third country impose to us that the cows should be in a grass, totally free, in the open air, like happens in La Pampa. We will not accept this because we are in a different situation here. And there are areas that are really cold. And our cows should be under a roof, in a house, and need to have particular products for feed, and cannot be in the grass because some place in the Union, in my country, I am Spanish, and in Spain, not in all areas, we have this green grass. Mm-hmm. So we need to supplement the animals, and these are considerations that we need to take into account. What it means? It means that when we apply the rules, the requirements, the import requirements to third countries, first place, all the sanitary conditions, whatever can affect the health of the human, of the animals, or of the plants, have to be exactly the same and at the same level. With other criteria, we need to consider one-by-one cases.
Okay, Christina, thank you very much. That's a very comprehensive answer to that question and discussion that we had a little bit earlier on. I'm just going to go to Anne-Laure. There may be a question from online.
Yes, we have two questions online. The first one is to Faustine. It reads, do you have scientific evidence that agriculture is responsible for the shrinking of insects and bird populations? What do you think of new breeding technologies which are scientifically supported as useful tools for adapting plant production to climate change? I would have then another question for Amy, but maybe first Faustine's answer.
Faustine?
Yes, and am I allowed to come back to what has been said before as well?
It will be brief because we're shutting off at 6:30 and I want Mr. Boucher to wrap up. So brief as you can.
I think it's important. On the blaming the farming sector, you make that conclusion. I did not blame the farming sector. I said that our food system is unsustainable, that this is the problem, and that we need to tackle both consumption and production, and that consumption is a driver of production, and that, of course, this needs to be done also in the context of food environments, which was well explained before. Now you refer to the fact that we have a growing population. We already have unsustainable consumption level today, so we even more need to tackle consumption in that context of growing population. Trying to meet unsustainable demand in the context of finite resources is leading to unsustainable solutions. Full stop. And last, because you referred to the CAP, you said that it won't have impact. And actually, I'm asking you, do you have an impact assessment at hand? Because there was no impact assessment that was published, so maybe you have seen
Okay, I'm going to have to come back to Patrick now to let him back.
Sorry, I haven't seen it, so I'm just asking, because it would be useful, given that there was no impact assessment and no public consultation as such on this proposal.
And the questions online, and then I'll give Patrick a right to reply.
Yes, and I mean, I also wanted to flag, sorry, because it's important, because you refer to farmers, but I have seen yesterday that there was a letter that was signed by IFOAM and ECVC actually criticizing the proposals from the Commission. So it doesn't seem that it is pleasing all farmers, according to that letter. So now on scientific evidence, yes, there is plenty. I mean, I can send them, that's clear. I mean, pesticide use and intensive farming is driving insects decline, indeed. And so NGTs, I mean, I think that there were new reports, also, I think it was in France that some reports had not been published and were hidden, etc. I mean, we don't have a position on that per se, but it's important to look at, you know, these assessments and to understand the impacts.
Okay, I'm going to give Patrick Wright a reply there. Patrick?
Basically, I would just mention on the CAP proposal, which clearly, I actually will go back on the situation of farming. So the first year of the CAP, so 2023, was clearly a challenging year, complicated year that was not expected. So these proposals are going to check and simplify what need to be implemented. So clearly, and the objective is to give stability until 2027. On the impact assessment, there's neither need to reply. There was an emergency situation, no reconsideration of the objectives of the CAP, of the GAICs which are there. So I think the narrative of putting, again, a new impact assessment or rethinking all the CAP, it's not in the good direction. Thanks.
Okay, and I know that both organisations that you represent are around the strategic dialogue table. I'd love to be a fly on the wall, to be honest, but anyway, look, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank all of you for your time and for your opinions that you've given us. Wolfgang Buscher, I will give you 5 or 6 minutes maybe just to respond. Director General in DG Agri, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Damien, for this opportunity to wrap up this discussion. Some general remarks and some optimistic remarks. Europe is quite enjoying a high level of self-sufficiency when it comes to food, both in terms of animal-based food, plant-based food, fruit and vegetables. Where we are weaker is that we are depending on some inputs, in particular feed, high proteins, energy, and these kind of elements. But by and large, we enjoy something that we call huge or considerable strategic autonomy, which we are looking for in other policy areas. And in food, we have it. Now, is there a crisis in the food sector? And does it justify the measures? I think the crisis, as we perceive it in the Commission, is an amalgam of many elements. COVID and Ukraine was mentioned. But if you look at the farmers' protests, it's also based on the point you have discussed, imports from third countries that are meeting not necessarily our production standards. It is about the fair prices for farmers in the value chain. It is new and additional commitments, in particular relating to climate, biodiversity and environment, and still relating to this in particular, additional administrative burden. This is why farmers are protesting. And what is wrong? To listen to protests of such a scale for a democratic institution and try to enter into these challenges that have been identified and try to reply to them. And this is what we have done with this simplification package and with the ideas how we can ensure that farm prices for farmers in the value chain are appropriate and commensurate. Now, if you look at the future of farming in Europe, let us recall some basic figures. We have lost in the last 10 years about 3 million farmers. Now, you might argue this is not really important because the agricultural production has remained stable, has even increased. We have a positive balance of 70 billion euros in terms of exports. We have agriculture across the continent, and the agricultural area of 157 million is still maintained. But still, I think, we have lost 3 million farmers and another 7-8 million farmers between 2010 and 2010. The average age of farmers is 57. So if this is such a great business, why do we have these figures? So I think we need seriously look into it, what is happening. And the first thing is, and I just will reply on two issues, I think. One is the farm income, and the other thing is our commitments in terms of addressing climate change, biodiversity loss, and environment. On income, I think many of you have referred to the issue, and I think Professor Alan Matthew has pointed to the 2080. 20% of farmers receive 80% of the funding. Clearly, this is an issue. This has always been an issue in every reform. We have addressed it. The legislators in democratic institutions have decided otherwise. But we have to continue to address it. And I think in this existing reform, we ensure that every year 4 billion euros are redistributed from bigger farms to smaller and medium-sized farms. And these efforts which we need to continue, because I'm still convinced when we are discussing about the scale of farming, I think what makes Europe great is the diversity of farming landscapes. Would we like to miss small farms in Austrian mountains, in Romania, in Bulgaria? They contribute to the livelihood of rural areas, to the landscape features. How would these areas look like without agriculture? So I still think to maintain agriculture across the continent in different scales and forms of agriculture is important. And I believe that this requires income support for quite a number of farmers. Because even if you increase farm prices, if you have 10 milk cows, the milk price will probably not help you to get your income. So that's on the income side. On the question of sustainability, ecological sustainability, I think Faustine is entirely right. We have no option then to address the challenges arising from climate change, from biodiversity loss, from bad quality of water, air, and soil. But I think what we have seen over the last 4 years is that we have to do it in a balanced manner. What matters is the speed of change and the depth of change. Now, I accept the argument that the situation might be such that we have to be quick and in-depth in our reforms. But if society, if democratic institutions do not at the end share this and ask for more time for balanced solutions, what shall we do in our societies? And I think this is what we are facing. I still think that our common agricultural policy, and if you look at the strategic plans, they hugely contribute to the policy objectives I have just raised in terms of climate, biodiversity, and soil, water, and air. 1/3 of the money, 100 billion euros, is dedicated exclusively to measures that should favor these policy objectives. So I think I'm really convinced that this CAP, even in the reviewed form, still hugely contributes to these policy objectives. And livestock is singled out often in the discussion. And I think we will have this discussion on a more balanced diet. I do not challenge it. But what I do not like in this discussion is that there are people, if they see a cattle, they associate methane emissions and correlation with cancer. And for me, a cow is more than correlation with cancer and methane emissions. There is huge positive externalities in terms of biodiversity, in terms of maintaining rural areas, in terms of taking care of pasture land.
I have just seen, because we are talking a lot about science, I've seen a study which discusses for my country, Austria, what would happen if you reduce livestock. Yes, we would have less methane emissions. But who takes care of the alpine pastures? Who ensures biodiversity there? Who takes care of the land? So I think my only plaidoyer in this discussion, let us have not a simplistic but holistic view and discussion on these issues.
Okay, merci beaucoup. Pour finir, j'aimerais redonner la parole à Monsieur Clégeot.
Merci beaucoup. Merci pour cet échange très riche. Et je continue à m'exprimer en français en remerciant les interprètes. Et qui éclaire la nature des efforts que nous devons faire pour trouver le réel chemin d'un débat. Pourquoi je dis ça? Parce qu'on a un problème de récit et de compréhension de la période dans laquelle on vit. Est-ce que l'on a changé de monde ou est-ce qu'on a vécu une crise et que l'on peut revenir au monde d'avant? C'est ça la question qui est posée et à laquelle nous avons du mal à répondre véritablement. Et moi, je suis effaré par le récit dominant porté par le COPA-COGECA depuis 2 ans que les désordres récents justifient l'immobilisme et le conservatisme. Je ne crois pas qu'on puisse aller dans cette direction-là et qu'il faut au contraire qu'on se réinterroge sur les notions mêmes à partir desquelles on travaille. Est-ce que la balance commerciale ou le revenu de l'exploitation sont des bons indicateurs de la politique agricole? Est-ce que ça permet de prendre en compte toutes les dimensions holistiques, écosystémiques que vous venez d'évoquer? Moi, je pense qu'il faut avoir cette discussion-là et qu'il faut réhabiliter l'approche écosystémique qui était celle de Farm to Fork, qui a été délégitimée mois après mois avec des histoires que l'on raconte comme si Farm to Fork avait prévu la baisse de la production. Ça n'a jamais existé. C'est certaines études d'impact extérieures qui l'ont plaidé, qui ont bien réussi dans leur propagande politique. Farm to Fork, c'était une tentative, peut-être à améliorer, d'avoir une approche systémique de tous les effets, de toutes les conséquences de l'agriculture sur les territoires, sur la santé, sur l'environnement, sur l'économie, sur l'emploi et sur la production. Donc, il me semble qu'on est à un moment où il faut accepter de remettre à plat ces points-là dans une discussion ouverte, et je pense qu'elle viendra dans l'élection, mais surtout après l'élection ici. Et moi, je plaiderai, je termine par là, sur des principes simples. Faire le choix de la souveraineté alimentaire, que chaque pays ou ensemble de pays dans le monde puisse produire sur son territoire l'essentiel de ce dont ses habitants ont besoin. Et je suis très étonné d'entendre encore parler de la vocation à nourrir le monde de l'agriculture européenne. Mettre de l'ordre dans le désordre des marchés, retrouver le chemin de ce qui était possible dans l'OCM pour réguler les marchés, les organiser, les rationaliser. Encourager l'organisation collective des agriculteurs et des filières. Non, un agriculteur n'est pas un chef d'entreprise isolé qui prend ses décisions seul. Il s'inscrit dans des collectifs, organisations de producteurs, dans des filières, dans des coopératives, dans des territoires, et cette dimension, elle est essentielle. Et discuter, décider ensemble qu'est-ce que ça veut dire protéger les revenus des agriculteurs. Dans quelles conditions se forment les prix de l'échange et en quoi ça contribue aux revenus des agriculteurs. Et quelles sont les autres manières, vous venez de le dire, de compléter le revenu des agriculteurs et pourquoi et au nom de quels objectifs de politique publique et au nom de quelle légitimité et avec quelle distribution ou redistribution des aides. Si on doit réellement se poser ces questions-là et se poser les questions donc des objectifs de politique publique qu'on donne à la PAC, je pense que ça plaidera pour une vraie refonte de la politique agricole commune et une vraie refondation. Mais dans les 3 ans qui viennent, on peut faire beaucoup mieux avec la PAC actuelle. La main, elle est dans les États. Certains font très bien, d'autres font moins bien. Et moi, je suis très inquiet de ce que les États vont faire de la réforme qui a été imposée par le Conseil et par la présidente de la Commission au secteur, et par le COPA-COGECA au secteur agricole, parce que la manière dont on revoit à la baisse les engagements environnementaux de la PAC, dont on le renvoie aux États, n'aura aucune conséquence positive pour les revenus des agriculteurs, risque d'être facteur de distorsion de concurrence très forte et risque de conduire à un recul de la transition agroécologique de l'agriculture, qui sera une impasse pour l'agriculture elle-même et un problème majeur de légitimité de l'agriculture et de la PAC pour les habitants et les citoyens de l'Europe. Et à la fin, il faudra quand même bien décider si on remet ou pas les dizaines de milliards de la PAC dans le budget de l'Union. Donc si les uns et les autres veulent encore une politique agricole commune après 2027 ou 2029, il faudra arriver à convaincre de la nécessité de le faire et des raisons pour lesquelles on le fait. En tout cas, moi, ça m'a permis, cette discussion d'aujourd'hui, de voir la diversité des points de vue et des approches et de mon idée, vraiment la nécessité de retrouver une mise à plat du débat, un débat transpartisan, un débat éclairé par la science et par la diversité des contributions dès le lendemain de l'élection européenne. Merci en tout cas à l'ENAJ pour l'organisation de cet événement et je suis encore très heureux d'avoir pu le faciliter et l'accueillir. Merci à vous.
Du coup, je vais faire les annonces administratives. Il va falloir quitter la salle. I'm going to switch to English. I'm going to go for administrative announcement, which is that we need to leave the room. We're a bit late. We're already supposed to be out of the building. I'm going to ask you to go back to the third floor and go out the way you came, which is across the passerelle all the way to the elevators.